So we are in chapter 2 of Pirkei Avos. Last week we started the fourth Mishnah, and actually I realized I pointed out last week that the fourth Mishnah has kind of two parts, and actually some versions of Pirkei Avos actually divide it into two separate Mishnahs. Then the numbers get off from here on out, depending on which version you have. But we're going to be continuing on as if it's the fourth Mishnah, so we'll still call it that. And we are starting halfway through the fourth Mishnah. So I think on the source sheet, which I don't actually have in front of me, but I think it has both halves. So we're starting in the second half. So the second half says, Hillel Omer. Hillel used to say, Al tifrosh min hatzibor. One should not separate oneself from the community. Do not separate yourself from the community. Ve'al ta'amin be'atzmecha ad yom moscha. And don't trust yourself until the day of your death. Ve'al tadin es chavercha ad shetagia limekomo. And don't judge your friend until you arrive in their place. Ve'al tomar davar she'afshar lishmoa, and don't say something that's impossible to hear, she'sofo lehishama, that in the end it will be heard. And we'll have to still, explain what all these things mean, but especially that one, it's very unclear what that means. Ve'al tomar likeshe'ipane eshne, shema lo tipane. Don't say, when I have free time, I'll study, because maybe you'll never have free time. So Hillel here makes a total of, about 5 statements. Number 1, don't separate yourself from the tzibur, from the congregation. Number 2, don't trust yourself until the day you die. Number 3, don't judge your friend until you arrive in their place. Number 4, don't say something that can't be heard, or maybe can't be understood. And in the end, it will be. So again, we need to explain what that means. And number 5, don't say when I have time, when I'm free, when I have free time, I'll study, because maybe you won't ever have free time. So let's start just on the most basic level. I think these ideas are somewhat self-evident, what they mean, at least most of them. But of course, there's the self-evident, and then there's alternate ways of reading it that can bring out new and informative lessons. So I think on the most basic level, we can say, the Midrash Shmuel quotes from the Bartanura, one of the primary commentators on the Mishnah, that the first idea is don't separate from the congregation. So besides for what it means is be part of a community, but he says that it means, especially in particular in times of difficulty, don't say, oh, that's their problem, and it doesn't apply to me, so I'm not going to be a part of that. But rather, if the community is suffering, then one should join them, so to speak, and try to help, and at least be compassionate and empathize with them, because if a person doesn't do that, so then they first of all are not part of the community, but also there's an idea that if a person doesn't join the community in the times of difficulty, then they won't merit to be a part of the community in the times of consolement, in the times where things rebound. So that's the first idea, according to the Bartanura, of don't separate from the congregation. It's not only a more general point of make sure you're part of a community, which is true too, but he focuses on, especially in times of difficulty, you don't say, not my problem, I'll be I'm not going to join them in their prayer or whatever they're doing to get through their situation. Rather, a person should join in that in the public time of difficulty. The second clause is don't trust yourself until the day you die. So he actually mentions the story recorded in the Talmud of a certain high priest named Yochanan the Kohen Gadol. There was probably more than one Yochanan the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, throughout the Second Temple period, but there was a certain one who was very righteous, and then he became wicked, and he became a heretic. So, here we had this, he was the high priest, he was very righteous, and in the end, he went in the wrong direction. So what this lesson is we always have to be striving, never take our foot off the pedal. And also, as confident as we are in our state of spirituality and in our faith, etc., we have to still take care not to allow it to be challenged deliberately through what we participate in, what we read, what we engage in. We have to be on guard, and because we are always open to influence. And so a person shouldn't trust themselves until the day that they die. And he actually quotes an interesting little, there's a verse in Tehillim, in Psalms, that says that the holy ones that are in the ground, or that are on the land, really. I think the simple reading is the holy ones on the land, and whatever the context is over there. But he suggests, he quotes someone who reads that verse, that it means the holy ones that are in the ground, meaning you can't say somebody's holy until they're in the ground, because until somebody actually leaves the world, then who knows what can happen to that person. And that's this idea of a person can't trust themselves until the day that they die. And again, the lesson is we have to always be striving to grow, and we also have to always be on guard and be careful about what we allow into our lives, what kind of influences. The third clause, do not judge your friend until you come to his place. So again, just on the most simple level, you see a person is tested and they fail in the test, they give in to a temptation or whatever it might be. So we might judge them, we might look down on them. And the Mishna is telling us that unless you've been through the same test and overcome it, then you have no right to judge them. And probably at its core, this means we never have the right to judge someone because we've never been through the same test. And even if circumstances seem the same, but ultimately everybody has their own set of circumstances. So the Mishnah is telling us, don't judge your friend until you come to his place. But practically speaking, that's not really going to happen. So it's not for us to judge, it's for God to judge. Now, of course, there's a system of judgment, of justice at times, of a court system, but between each other, there's no need for us to judge. We can always try to inspire others, but there's no need to judge them, and we really can't, because we don't know all the circumstances that they're going through. And the next clause is actually the most difficult one to read in the Mishnah. Do not say something that is impossible to hear or to understand. For in the end, it will be understood, or for the end, it will be heard. So what does this line mean? So the Bartanura says that it means that when somebody speaks, they shouldn't say something that can't be understood and rely on, in the end, they'll understand it. Meaning if we say something, if we're speaking and we say something that's unclear, and especially if it's something that can have an impact if misunderstood, if they, especially we're speaking of important concepts, important understanding of Judaism or of God or whatever it might be, we have to be very careful how we speak. And we can't say something that at first is difficult to understand and say, in the end, it will be understood. When I get to the last point, then everything will come together, because that whole time that the person doesn't understand, that's problematic. And first of all, who says they'll understand in the end? And so we have to just be clear at all times. That's how the Bartanura reads this line. Don't say something that's difficult to understand, or that's impossible, that can't be understood, and assuming, but at the end it will be understood. So there's actually a number of commentaries that take that approach. But I found the Midrash Shmuel quotes the comment of Rabbi Yosef Nachmias, who pokes a little fun at this interpretation. He actually quotes it from the Rambam also. Maimonides gave the same interpretation, that don't say something that can't be understood, simply at the beginning until the person delves into it, and in the end they'll come to an understanding. So Rabbi Yosef ibn Nachmias, he says, if that's true, if that's what this statement is saying, then, well, this statement can only be understood if we really look into it with great effort. So this author of this Mishnah is trying to teach us the lesson not to make a statement that's unclear unless you delve into it, then in the end you'll understand it. Well, this very statement is, if that's really what it means, it's really difficult to understand this statement without delving into it. So he doesn't think that would be what the author of this Mishnah was getting at. And therefore, he takes a different approach. He says that when it says don't say something that can't be heard, what it simply means is that a person has to distance themselves from falsehood, and don't say something that can't be heard because it's false, and don't say that it's true and that it's fit to be heard, and don't say it's possible when it's impossible. So the way that he reads the line of the Mishnah is, don't say something that don't say something that's false, that's impossible to be heard because it's false, and claim that it will be heard, that it's understood, and that it's true. So the idea of impossible to be heard is a way of saying false, and in the end it will be heard. Sofo lehi shama is a way of saying it's true. So don't claim that something is true when in fact it is false. Okay, I mean that would be a very simple lesson, which is possible. Pirkei Avos, not every line has the most profound lesson. Some of it could just be simple reminders, but that's how he takes it. That it's telling us to distance ourselves from falsehood, and don't claim that something is understood is true when in fact it is not. Okay, alternatively, we can read this line. Don't say something that cannot be heard could mean don't say something that you don't want anybody else to hear. Even if you're just speaking to yourself, we could apply in a situation you're talking to a friend and you don't want anybody else to hear it. Well, if you don't want anybody else to hear it, then you probably shouldn't say it, because in the end it will be heard. Things get out, things have a way of getting around. And the sages have an expression that we have an expression, the walls have ears. I actually think it comes from the Talmud. Actually, I think that very line is in the Talmud. The walls have ears, but there's also an expression that like the birds carry the voice, carry the word. So these ideas that if a person doesn't want something to get out, then they should probably hold it in, because once we tell one person, then it can get out. And the Mishnah, the way one interpretation is even just talking to oneself, voicing something out loud already, especially in our day and age with listening devices and all those, recordings and things like that, it's probably especially pertinent that if somebody doesn't want something heard, then they shouldn't say it. Fine. And then the last line, again, on the simple level, it's very simple. Don't say, when I have time, I'll learn. you might not have time. So this is something that's obvious, but unfortunately, many of us fall prey to this. I'll take care of it when I have time. So we do it for many things. The Mishnah is particularly talking about in terms of Torah study. We have an idea that we are supposed to set times for Torah study. If we leave it just to when I have time, then it's not really going to happen. And if it does, it's going to be in a way that's just not very productive. Part of my job as a teacher and giving various classes is recruiting, inviting people to learn, inviting people to various classes. And too often do I get the response, things are really busy, things are very hectic. When things settle down, then I'll participate. So the Mishnah is telling us, you should know that things never settle down, right? There's no such thing. So either you make time for it or you don't make time for it, but it's not going to happen when things settle down because things never settle down. So that's what the Mishnah is saying. Don't say when I have time, when I have some free time, then I'll learn, because nobody ever has free time, because we always fill our free time with other things. And so unless we set aside time for what's important for us, then we're not going to have time for it. So that's the last clause of the Mishnah. Now, so that's just simple reading of the Mishnah, one by one. Don't distance ourselves from the congregation, be apart, especially in times of difficulty, be there for the congregation. Number 2, don't trust yourself until the day you die, always be on guard, always be striving. Don't judge someone else until you come to their place, which is probably never going to happen. So therefore, don't judge others. It's not our job to judge others. Don't say something that either won't be understood at first, because and relying on that it will be understood in the end, or requiring somebody to really delve into it to understand it, because that can lead to mistakes. And or don't say something that you don't want to get out, because it will end up getting out, it will end up being heard. And finally, don't say that when I have time to study, I'll study, because you might not find time. And I would actually maybe rephrase that: you won't find time if it's just when I have free time. The Midrash Shmuel suggests another way to look at this Mishnah, which is connecting it back to the earlier part of the Mishnah, which talked about, sorry, it's not the earlier part of the Mishnah, it's the previous Mishnah, or 2 Mishnahs ago, I think, that talked about working on behalf of the congregation. That the Mishnah, I guess it was Mishnah, the second Mishnah of the chapter, which we started with last week. So that Mishnah mentioned that a person should be involved in the needs of the public, and the public needs l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. So the Midrash Shmuel suggests that this Mishnah, this part of this Mishnah, is connected to that, and he actually introduces that idea with a couple of questions that we can ask about the Mishnah. So the Mishnah is a statement of Hillel Omer. The way that we've been approaching each chapter here, or as we went through the first chapter, we had various statements of different pairs of people going down, and we had among them Hillel and Shammai. And then we had Hillel make a few statements, and we had Shammai make a few statements. That was back in the first chapter. And so he asks, why didn't we put these statements of Hillel back in the first chapter when we had the rest of the statements of Hillel the elder? That's one question. Secondly, what is the connection between these various statements? They seem somewhat disparate. What do they have anything to do with each other? So he says that this is coming on the heels of the teaching that a person should involve themselves in the needs of the congregation for the sake of heaven. And therefore, it juxtaposes, it segues into the statement of Hillel here, which also warns a person that they should be involved in the needs of the congregation and not to separate from the congregation. So that's the opening line. Don't distance yourself from the congregation. And the Mishnah then goes on to explain that there are 4 reasons why a person might separate from the congregation. So we mentioned there's 5 things in the Mishnah. So the opening one, don't separate from the congregation, is coming on the heels of being involved in the needs of the public and public needs of the needs of the congregation for the sake of heaven. And that's what Hillel says, don't separate from that. Be there for the congregation in their times of need. And there are 4 reasons you might distance yourself, and he's going to knock them down one by one. So the first is that a person might have a sort of a holier than thou attitude. I don't need to be a part of the congregation. I'm fine on my own. I have my own merits to stand on. I don't need the merits of the congregation. And therefore I'm going to go and live off in a cave, live on my own. And I don't need the congregation. I don't need to be a part. So to that, the Hillel says, don't trust yourself until the day that you die. You think right now you're this great person and you don't need to be a part of a congregation. So you never know. You never know. You don't necessarily, those merits won't necessarily always be there for you. And I would add that if a person is not a part of a congregation, then it's harder actually to maintain a spiritual state. A person's living on their own, so they don't have role models, or even forget about role models. They don't have other people doing the same things. It's so much harder to be a God-fearing Jew on our own. But if we're part of a group, if we're part of a team, we're part of a congregation, so then it becomes so much easier. So this person says, oh, I don't need to be part of a congregation. I'm really fine on my own. So Hillel warns him, don't trust yourself until the day that you die. Don't just assume you're good and you don't need the merits of the congregation. You don't need the influence, the inspiration of being part of a congregation. No, everybody needs that. So that's number one. Number two is that he says, okay, I understand I should be part of a congregation, but these people, they're sinners. They're a terrible influence on me. I don't want to be a part of their group. Now, we did talk about, being around bad influences, but so it obviously depends on the situation. But the important teaching here is that that this person says that I should distance myself from the congregation at large. They're a bad influence on me. So to that, it says that it adds, don't judge them until you come to their place. That's the second statement. Don't judge them until you come to their place, because if you were in their place, then you might do the same, meaning you're not necessarily any better than they are, and therefore that's not a reason to distance yourself. So again, I think this has to be balanced with the Mishnah that we learned about distancing ourselves from bad influences, which we do need to do. How do we do that without judging someone, right? So it's kind of, I don't have an easy answer for that. But here I think it's also more in the context of a congregation, meaning person has one bad neighbor. So then the Mishnah we learned, you should distance yourself from a bad neighbor. But here it's a congregation. It's a group of people. We're not talking about a group of people who are just, sinning all the time. And we're talking about, good people, but they also, make mistakes. And this person thinks, well, if they're erring, so I can't be a part of this. I can't be with them. To that, the Mishnah says, don't be so quick to judge until you come to their place. Number three, the third reason a person might decide to distance him or herself from a congregation is because this person has something, they have an opinion, and they think things should be done a certain way, and the people, the people of the congregation, the group, are not listening. They're not accepting my position. They're not accepting my viewpoint. So I say, if you won't listen to me, I think things should be done a certain way. If you're not going to listen, then I'm not going to have anything to do with you, right? If the shul, whatever, the community, whatever type of community we're talking about, if they won't listen to my viewpoint, so then I'm not going to have anything to do with them. I'm going to separate from the community. To that, the Mishnah says, don't say something that can't be heard. Meaning, don't say something that is something that people aren't necessarily going to accept, and saying it must be heard in the end. So that was the line. Don't say something that can't be heard. Don't say about it that it in the end it has to be heard. And if not, then I'm going to have nothing to do with you. So don't take up the hardline position and think my opinion has to be the one that's accepted. And if not, then I'm leaving, right? So, and unfortunately, this is something that I think happens all too often, right? In a community, in a shul, somebody has very opinionated, and if they don't do it my way, I'm going somewhere else. I'm going elsewhere. So to that, Hillel says the third reason somebody might separate from a congregation is because they won't listen to my opinion. Don't do that. Don't be so hardline in your opinions and try to force the congregation to accept it, threatening that you're going to leave if they don't accept it, because don't do that. And also don't end up separating as a result of that. And number 4, the fourth reason a person might try to separate from the congregation, from the community, is that the person feels that being involved in the community is taking up too much of my time, and I don't have time to study Torah, which seems like a valid claim, and therefore the person says, I'm going to distance myself from the community so that I have more free time to study Torah day and night. So to that, the Mishnah says, don't say that when I'm free, I'm going to learn. Meaning, don't say that when I'm going to free myself from my duties to the community, from being involved in the community, and then I'll be able to study. As long as I'm still part of this community, I can't study. It's taking up too much of my time to contribute and to help others in the community. When I'm free from those obligations, so then I'll be able to study. And therefore, I'm going to distance myself from the community. So to that, Hillel once again says, don't say that, because you don't even know that that's going to work out. Because what's going to happen? You're going to leave the community so that you have time now to study, so that you're not busy with those duties. Well, maybe you still won't have free time, because like we sort of alluded to before, it's going to be something else that easily something else can come and take up your time. And then you'll be in a worse situation, because right now, at least your time is being used for something productive, something good. You're contributing to the community. So you want to have time for more important things. So you may remember last week, we actually offered an explanation of the Mishnah, that the Mishnah said that a person should be involved in the community for the sake of heaven, should be involved in the needs of the community for the sake of heaven. And it's saying you'll have the merits of the community. The way that we explained that was that a person might make this very claim: if I'm involved in the community, and I'm helping out with this project and that project, when am I going to study Torah? So it's a good question, and certainly a person should make some time. But the Mishnah, the way we explained it last week was that that's okay, that the needs of the community can come ahead of a person's own spiritual growth. And don't worry, you'll get rewarded for that, we said. You'll have the merits of the community behind you. So here we have a person who's saying, when I'm free of the duties that I have towards the community, so then I'll be able to study. So let me distance myself from the community. And to that, Hillel says, don't do that, because you might not have time, and you might just not be free. You might get involved in other things, and those won't be servicing the community. So at least now you're involved in something good. You're helping the community. And instead you're going to say, I'm giving up my position on the board of the synagogue or whatever, right? Because I want to have more time. So for studies, that's a nice idea, but easily what can come from that is instead of being on the board and helping out the synagogue, you're now involved in some other mundane need that's not helping the community and is not studying Torah either. So Hillel says that one should not separate for the community for that purpose either. So again, going through the four things, the Mishnah is introduced on the heels of the teaching that a person should be involved in the needs of the community, l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. Comes Hillel and says, don't distance yourself from the community, following up on that. And then he says 4 reasons that a person might want to separate from the community. And number 1 was that the person thinks they don't need the merits of the community. They don't need to be part of a community. To that, he says, don't trust yourself until the day you die. You need to be part of a community. You need the merits of the community. Number 2, person says, well, they're not the greatest people to be around. So to that, Hillel says, don't judge them until you're in their place. And then the person might say that, I'm leaving because they won't listen to my opinion. So to that, Hillel says, don't make demands that they listen to your opinion and threaten to leave as a result of that, if they don't listen. And finally, person might leave the community so that they don't have to be involved in the community, so they have more time to study. Hillel says that's not a good idea. You may just end up involved in other things, and then it'll be a lose-lose. You won't be studying Torah and you won't be helping the community, so you end up with nothing. Okay. Okay, I think that is good for this Mishnah. Okay, yeah, let's go on to the next Mishnah. Okay, Mishnah Hey. Hu Haya Omer. So this is a continuation of the teachings of Hillel. So Hu Haya Omer. He used to say, Ein bur yirechet. A boor, actually, that's a Hebrew word, but it's also an English word. A boor, a brute, someone who behaves in a way that not only are they ignorant, but they also just they don't behave in a normal way around people. They don't behave properly towards people. They don't have derech eretz. So such a person, the Mishnah says, does not fear sin. Okay, a brute doesn't fear sin. V'lo am haaretz chassid. Am haaretz is a way of saying a person who doesn't have Torah knowledge. Someone who doesn't have Torah knowledge is not a chassid. When we say chassid, we don't mean like someone with like long peyos, long sideburns. We mean what the word chassid actually means, which is someone who's very pious. So someone who doesn't have Torah knowledge is not going to be pious. Below habaishan lamed, and a person who is embarrassed or timid cannot learn. v'lo hakaptan melamed, and a person who is very impatient, makbid, cares about everything, yells a lot, will not be able to teach. V'lo kol hamarbe bischora machkim, and not everyone who is involved in business will be able to become wise. Uv'makom she'ein anashim hishtadel liosish, and in a place where there are no men, one should try to be a man. Or if there's no women, one should try to be a woman. So we'll see that's actually a line that has many different interpretations. So we'll see as we go. So again, a whole list of things here, just list it off. Number one, a boor, a brute, does not fear sin. Somebody who does not have Torah knowledge and Am Haaretz will not be pious. A person who's embarrassed can't learn. A person who is impatient can't teach. And not every person who's involved in business will be able to become wise, or one who's involved in business won't be able to become wise, maybe with exceptions, and in a place where there are no men, a person should strive to be a man. Okay, so the first idea of ein bor yirei chet, a boor, a brute, will not be sin-fearing. So we're talking again about a person who doesn't, not only do they not know anything, they don't have any Torah knowledge, but more than that, they don't have derech eretz, they don't have proper conduct with people, proper manners, proper respect for others, and they just can't get along with around others. So such a person, the Mishnah is telling us, will not be able to be, will never have fear of sin, because if a person doesn't have basic midos, doesn't have basic character traits, good character traits, so will never be able to fear sin. And the idea is that in order to really reach the level of fear of sin, to have a proper attitude towards the world and be someone who's mindful of what's right and what's wrong. So the first thing a person needs is proper midos, proper character traits. And that's the first step. And a person can build up from that and then develop, once they have good character traits, then they can develop their Torah knowledge, and they can also become someone who's sin-fearing, who lives sort of with the knowledge of God. You know, there's different subtle differences between sin-fearing and God-fearing, but the starting point is a person needs to have derech eretz, has to simply be able to have basic I don't even want to say manners, but character, basic midos, to be able to reach a level of to even set themselves on the path to become sin-fearing. The second clause, that an Am Haaretz won't be a chassid. So the Mishna Shmuel quotes an interpretation that actually this is not as extreme as it might. I mean, it doesn't sound so extreme, but he says that there are different levels. And he says there's something called a tzaddik. A tzaddik is a righteous person. I mean, there's a higher level called a chassid, which is a pious person, we'll say. But there's different levels. And the tzaddik is actually in the middle. A righteous person is in the middle. Chassid is even higher. And a person who's an Am Haaretz, somebody who doesn't have Torah knowledge, but they have midos, they have basic good character traits, so they can get along with others, they have respect for others, etc. So he says, we can't call them a chassid, we can't say they're super pious, because that will only come with Torah knowledge, but they could be a tzaddik, they could still be considered someone who's righteous. And that's what the Mishnah is expressing according to this interpretation, that it's like if you tell someone, you're not going to be the greatest, right, okay, fine, I won't be the greatest, but I could still be great or good, So that's how it's interpreting this line. Somebody who has, and it's speaking to the importance of basic character traits. That's always the starting point. The starting point is that a person needs to have basic respect for others and be able to conduct themselves with, properly around others, with derech eretz. And so that's the baseline. And from there, a person can develop in other, to be greater in many different ways spiritually. But that's the basic. And so according to this approach, it's just saying, with that, you can't become a chassid. You can't become the most pious with just that. But you certainly are headed in the right direction, and can be considered righteous, can be considered a tzaddik. The next one, the lo habaishan lamed, somebody who's embarrassed can't learn. So that's very simple, right? If a person is too embarrassed to ask when they don't understand something, so then they will just continue to not understand. And or if they don't know something but they won't ask, then they're going to continue to do it the wrong way for the rest of their life. So the only way to learn is to not be embarrassed, to show that we don't know something, and then we can ask, and then we can learn more. And on the flip side, a impatient person, a kaptan, it's more than just impatient. It's somebody who takes issue with everything. Somebody who is troubled or bothered by everything that the students do. So he won't be able to teach, because they're not going to, back to the previous thing, they won't ask. They won't want to ask questions. They'll be too scared. They'll be too embarrassed if the teacher is impatient with them. And so the students will remain confused. So a teacher can't teach if he or she is a kaptan, is someone who's impatient and takes issue with everything that happens. And then it says, if they're in a place where there are no anashim, where there are no men, a person should strive to be a man. So what does that mean? So one way to explain it is that if there's nobody there, we're talking about teaching, right? How you learn, how you teach. What if there's nobody there to teach? So then, if there's nobody there to teach, a person has to teach themselves. If there are no people to teach, then a person has to try to learn on their own. That's one explanation. Alternatively, it could refer to the people's ability to overcome their yetzer hara, their inclination. In a place where there are no men, meaning there's nobody who is man enough to overcome their evil inclination. There's nobody who and by man here we could mean as opposed to animal. Right? An animal lives on its instincts, right? They just, whatever's instinctive, that's what they do. Human beings have free will, and we have the ability to overcome our instincts. So if a person lives among people there are no anashim, there's no people, everybody is just living off of their instincts, doing whatever will bring them the most, pleasure, as, most instant pleasure or long-term pleasure even. So then, and they're not overcoming their instincts. So still a person shouldn't learn from them, and rather should strive to be a human being, to realize and reach that exalted level of a human being who has free will, as opposed to being just like an animal. Another way we can read it is, if there's in a place where there's no people, there's no men, meaning a person's all alone. They're in what's called chadrei chadarim, in a room amongst rooms. They're home alone. Nobody's watching them. Nobody's watching. Let me do whatever I want, right? So to that, the Mishnah says that no, in a place where there is nobody watching, that's when we're tested, but we have to step up and put in the effort to be a righteous person, to stand up righteously and straight. So b'makom she'ein anashim, place where there's no people watching, that doesn't mean that we should slip up and succumb to sin, but rather we should stand up and be a righteous person. Another way to read it might be that if there's no great people around, so there's nobody who's, maybe we can say, that to look up to. So what can happen is, if a person is amongst people who they're nobody to look up to, and nobody whose conduct at least seems more elevated than mine, then we have a tendency to just fall in line with everybody else, sort of go with the flow. And if this is how people in this place conduct themselves, so then that's how I'll conduct themselves, and we don't strive to be greater. To that, the Mishnah is saying that in a place where there's no great people, there's no anashim, there's no great people, so don't let that drag you down, but rather still you should strive to be great, and strive to, don't just do whatever everybody else is doing because that's what everybody else does, but rather strive to be as great as you can, even if it's different than what other people are doing. So let me just go through. We just knocked off like 5 different ways to read this one line of in a place where there are no people, a person should strive to be a person, or in a place where there's no man, a person should strive to be a man. So one way is, if there's no teachers, a person should teach themselves. That's number one. Number two, we said that if there are no people, meaning everybody's acting like animals, they're not overcoming their basic instincts. So we have to strive still to overcome our instincts and to behave in an elevated fashion. Number three, we said that if there's nobody watching, in a place where there's no people, there's nobody watching, so then we still have to put in the effort to be upright individual. And number four, if there's nobody to look up to, and we find ourselves in a place where people conduct themselves in a way that maybe is not up to the standards that we should be up to, so don't let that drag us down, but rather a person should put in the effort to be still an upright and upstanding person. So I think actually that was four different ways to read that line. Okay. Let me just see if there's anything else we have to get to from this Mishnah.
Rabbi, did you not mention something about being in business?
Oh, thank you. Yes. So we have to say something about that. So there is a line in the Mishnah that says that a person who is involved in business will not become wise. So first of all, the commentaries point out that it says not everybody who's involved in business, meaning because the other ones were kind of across the board. A boor, a brute won't fear sin, and an am haaretz, somebody who doesn't have Torah knowledge, will not be pious, and someone who's embarrassed or timid won't learn, and someone who's impatient won't be able to teach. But then it said not everyone who is involved in a lot of business becomes wise. So the simple understanding of this line is that a person who is overly involved in their business ventures will not be able to become wise, will not be able to make time to study Torah. And so It's not saying that it can't be done, because there are many who have done it, and the Talmud has examples of people who were traders, traders, who were still became great sages, and so it could be done, but it's difficult. It's much more difficult the more a person is involved in their business, so the less time they'll have for achieving Torah wisdom, and so it comes back to finding the right balance, right? Which we've learned about, having the balance of Torah with derech eretz, of having Torah in that context. Derech eretz means work. Actually, we learned last week that I should just keep a Pirkei Avos in front of me, but we learned last week that a person who that study with work is good. Study with malacha. So there's definitely a that the Mishnah stresses, at least the simple reading of the Mishnah, the importance of having a balance, of having a livelihood and having the opportunity for study and for spiritual growth. But still over here, so here it's just expressing, I guess, that you have to have this, you have to realize that it becomes, the more a person is involved in business, then the more difficult it is to become wise in Torah, because obviously the way that a person divides up their time. So I don't have anything too profound to say on that line. That's, I think, the simple reading of it.
I guess I just take offense to that one, but that's okay.
Okay, you're welcome to. I mean, you shouldn't be offended. I think it's in terms of Torah wisdom, then we don't mean a person doesn't learn, but the more time, and doesn't mean specifically, one business. I think it means the more a person is involved in any livelihood, so the less a person has time to devote to study, and people get consumed by their livelihood, and they're not able to divide up their time in that way. And
yeah,
so
I'd like livelihood rather than in your own business, because anybody in any job, even if
right,
could not have the time.
Right. Okay, that's fair. Right. I don't know if it means specifically like business as opposed to something else. Although, right, the one thing about business is that if somebody owns a business, so there's an advantage, which is that they get to manage their time. But then there's a disadvantage, which is that often the more time they put in, the more that they earn. So depending on the business, but as opposed to somebody who has a job, so they sort of are limiting in how much they're allowed to work and get paid. So there's less of a temptation or a pull to put in more hours in the job. Now it happens to be, I think in 2022, that's becoming less and less true, because now people work and work and work and work and work in many different professions. And even if they're not business owners, because that's now the expectation, is that when you're trying to be on a Zoom class at 5 to 9, your boss can still contact you and say, oh, but we're working on this project, I need you now, right? So yeah. Go ahead.
I have a question about the earlier Mishnah about not leaving your community, because the Rambam says in Hilchot Tshuva that the Chozer b'Tshuva needs to be golem mimkomo. He needs to go from his place to another space. How does that work together?
Is he talking there about somebody who is amongst bad influences?
Not necessarily, but some.
Because there's a famous, I don't know which passage you're talking about. There's a famous passage of the Rambam of somebody where he makes this very important point that it's a person's nature to be influenced by their surroundings, and therefore a person who has bad influences should try to distance themselves from that, and to the point that if they need to, they should even move away to a desert and live by themselves. So is that what you're referring to, or is there a different passage? Okay, so we'll try to come back to it at the end.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
About בור ועם הארץ.
Wait, you gotta come closer.
Okay. About בור ועם הארץ.
Yeah.
So I understand that if you say בור, this person is בור ועם הארץ, it means it's not that good because there's no education at all. But if you can say this person is בור with a specific thing, am I right?
You could be a bore for a specific thing. Is that what you said?
Yeah. Specific, maybe I'm bored with some.
Right. In this context, I think a bore means like it means I mean, the English word, I don't know if we're familiar with the English word. There's an English word bore, which means the same as the Hebrew word bore. And it basically means someone who has no manners, no respect, can't get along with people. Here, we'll get the dictionary. An unrefined, ill-mannered person. So that's the dictionary definition, and that's, I think, what it means here. Somebody who has, they're unrefined. But we don't mean like they don't, know how to hold a fork. But the way that they engage with people, they're unrefined, and that if a person's lacking basic midos, basic character, so then it's hard. You need that starting point.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I found the passage.
Okay.
And it's not that one.
Okay.
It says it's Perek Sheni Halacha Daled. ועושה צדקה כפי כוחו מתרחק הרבה מן הדבר שחטא בו ומשנה שמו, כלומר אני אחר ואיני אותו איש שעשה אותם המעשים ומשנה מעשיו כולם לטוב ולדרך ישרה וגולם ממקומו שגלות מכפרת עוון מפני שגורמת לו להיכנע להיות עניו ושפל רוח.
So he said somebody should go into exile in order to become humble. Is that what? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
Basically, you should become more. You should have more humility by exiling yourself.
Okay. So I hear it. I think it's a fair question. I have to, look at it more carefully to see the exact context. I don't think we're recommending that for everybody. I don't think so. Maybe something more specific. Okay. Let me just, I guess we can probably wrap up here. Let me just do a quick scan here if there's anything that I have to say. I guess one other just general approach to this Mishnah is that, we have someone is what we were referring to as a bore. They're unrefined. They're this brute. So why has that person not tried to work on themselves? Why has that person not tried to grow? So it seems that such a person initially didn't have the character trait of yarechet, of sin fearing, right? Had the person had fear of sin, they would try to learn how to act. The same, we say an am haaret, somebody who is lacking in Torah knowledge, it is not going to be pious. Again, that's sort of, if they were so pious, they would try to build up their Torah knowledge so that they would know exactly how to comport themselves. So in general, if we look at someone, and again, not the point isn't that we should look at someone and judge them, but just as a general, way of understanding that that somebody who has not learned, could be they never had the opportunity. It could be though that they didn't care to because they didn't see it as important because they didn't have fear of sin. But the Mishnah, there's just another way to read the Mishnah, maybe saying, but there's 3 scenarios that would be exceptions to that, where the person wouldn't have been able to, the reason why they never gained knowledge was not because they didn't care to, but it could be that there was something else that was going on. And those are the 3 things that then the Mishnah lists off which is it could be they were too timid to learn, they were too afraid to ask, and so they never learned because they were too embarrassed to ask questions, and that's why that person remained in their state of ignorance. That's one possibility. And the second is maybe their teachers weren't good teachers. They were the impatient teachers, and it was the teachers who were at fault. And then thirdly, it could be that the person just would have wanted to learn, but they became consumed too much in other activities, such as their livelihood. And that would be another way to look at the Mishnah, just that the flow, the beginning of the Mishnah is telling us that if a person is lacking in knowledge, they remain an unrefined person. It means that they didn't fear sin, otherwise they would have tried to study. And the same, if a person was pious, they would have tried to acquire more knowledge, except the Mishnah says, but there are scenarios where even if they would have wanted to, they may not have been able to, which would be if they were too timid to ask, they didn't have a proper teacher, or they wanted to study, but they couldn't because they were too involved in their livelihood, either because they had to be or they didn't have to be, but whatever it might be. Okay, well, hold there. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.